Hi, I'm going to review the 2021 ICC Commercial Mechanical Inspector Certification. The designation for that test is M2 based on its website, iccsafe.org's website. The references are the IMC and the IFGC, both 2021 editions of these documents. I'm going to go through those documents, but I also created an online exam specifically for the IMC. I did not include the IFGC aspect yet. Maybe I'll get around to those questions, but I have everything highlighted. So I'll show you what those highlights are if you're going to take the commercial mechanical inspector. This video will go through all of the important pieces in the code for you to know so that you can select the right answers in the questions. This is the exam that we're talking about. So M2, Commercial Mechanical Inspector. If you're like an inspector responsible for mechanical inspections, most municipalities would expect you to get the M2. So this just shows you, what it costs, $305. Unless you're a member, it knocks it down 20%. So let me show you what that test plan looks like, the curriculum that we developed. What we based it on was the things we saw in the test, or I saw in the test, and what other people have said they saw in the test. So I added a few different practice tests down here. They're in the same format of other tests. The development of these tests was a little buggy. I'm not making any money off of this. I'm giving it to you for free, so I'm not going to go through the time and make this 4.0. I don't have the time for that, but it actually is pretty good. So the first two of these tests are 100 questions each, and then I think 50 and 50, and then the last one's like 33 questions long. Like I said, I had some problems developing this. There was a script issue. I don't know why it didn't come up, but you have the references there. So just look up like solder and brazing. Solder would be in chapter 2. For some reason, the answers didn't come up on a couple questions here, and I don't know why. But otherwise, it's pretty solid. These are actual test questions, and they should get you to 75% if you just go through and know the references I'm about to show you, as well as the questions here that are highlighted. So let me show you how this works. So let's look at question 100. Equipment on slope roofs that require services shall have a platform of at least 30 inches of working horizontal space on each side of the applicable or the appliance if the roof slope is more than what? And it happens to be 3 units and 12. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. If you look out of 100 questions, you're at 0.01 accuracy. That means you got 1 out of 100 right. So I didn't put percentage or number right. I just put a ratio really quick in the code, the computer code for this. Like I said, didn't put a lot of time into this. So look at 99. Equipment and appliances on roofs shall not require climbing over obstructions greater than what height above the roof. Honestly, I can't even remember what it is at this point. I'd have to look it up. 306.5 is where it's at. I would say 24 inches. Submit that. It's wrong. You could resubmit it. Let's see. I'll just go through this sequentially. So it's 30 inches high. So you can resubmit multiple times, and it'll just tell you the accuracy. You can also see on this that it changes color between wrong and right. So I didn't answer anything there. I did answer it correctly here. The correct answer is green. The incorrect answer is red. So just you can use that to tell you which ones are wrong and you need more attention to. Just as an example, let's look at 99 and verify how this works really quick. So let's go ahead and take a look at that reference 306.5 for question 99. So if you do that, 306.5, let's see what it says. If you don't know the answer, just look up the reference, 306.5. So 306.5 specifies, it's kind of a long one, 30 inches right there. So where equipment requiring access to appliances are located on an elevated structure so that that's 16 feet high, in other words, the roof is 16 feet high, access shall not require climbing over structures greater than 30 inches. So there it is right there. So these references are the ones that were used for all the questions on this test. They came right off of the actual M2 ICC Commercial Mechanical Inspector test. There's 333 total questions here, so it should get you a good start. So let's go ahead and go through the actual code and see what the code says, so I can show you the highlights and help speed things up a little bit for you. So let's start with Chapter 1, Scope and Administration. The first questions you're going to have is, go and look at this. See, I can't remember what the question was on this. I'd have to read the whole thing. But so basically, once you do an inspection as an inspector, you're done. But you also have to validate maintenance has been done. You have a little bit of authority there to ensure your HVAC is maintained. So the CO does have some authority. Go ahead and read through that and look at the intent for that. Change in occupancy always requires a new permit, period. But you're allowed to have, without a permit, some minor stuff such as repairs. Let's go and see additions, alterations, repairs. Let's see, minor additions, if it's in the same and is not hazardous and is approved. So what it comes down to is you can do minor stuff without requiring an inspection and permit. But you just go ahead and look through that. That's the reference you're going to follow. All reasonable times, that's when you are allowed to go in. You can't go at 3 a.m. to do an inspection as a mechanical inspector. But it does say you can set something up at reasonable times. Modifications. So anytime there's practical differences in executing the code official can grant a modification to the code as long as you're meeting the same level of safety. You do have to, the details of action granting modifications shall be recorded and entered in the files of the Mechanical Inspection Department. Test method. The code official shall approve the testing procedures. I'm going to go through this. You take a look at my highlights. The objective of the online quiz, I showed you the tests. You got to go through that 4 times. The first time you go through, what you're going to do is highlight stuff. And in my notes, what you see here is this question. I don't remember the exact question, but it was like, where is a permit? Which of these followings requires a permit? Something like that. So portable heating appliances, you don't have to get a permit for that. So cooling equipment, for instance, not otherwise, basically read through that. I don't remember what the answer was, but these are things that you don't have to get permits for is what it comes down to. So I'm not going to read or explain every one. Just go ahead and look at what I've set up here. Shows you what you need for construction documents, when you need registered design professional, PE in other words, 180 days for retention of construction documents. We'll just go through this. Just take a look at it, and if you have any questions, you can post them for me. But basically what I'm doing is by showing this to you, if you go through with your code book in this video, highlight the sections I highlight, and then when you go through the practice exams, it'll be a lot easier. You don't have to look them up, follow the reference. You just have them right there already lined up. So the reason I said 4 times through the practice exams is, first time you're not going to know the reference. Second, third time, it'll be iffy. By the 4th time, you should be able to look up within the code the question without looking at the reference. In other words, in the question, it has the reference, but you shouldn't have to look at the question's reference. Look at the real reference in the code book, in other words. So you should be able to know the layout of the code by the 4th time. So that's the objective of this, know the layout of the code. There are some calculations in this. I did include some of those calculations on the practice exams, but not all of them. Soldered versus non-soldered versus brazed. There's some definitions that are going to be asked about right there in Chapter 2. Let's see here. Okay, look at that. Refrigeration machinery room. Keep that in mind when we get there. Let's see, maybe I'll go back and I'll explain something. This did come up. This is a frequently misunderstood item, machinery room, right there. One time I had a couple lead engineers coming to me, and they were referencing the International Fire Code for refrigeration rooms. It said refrigeration machinery room. I don't exactly remember what it said, but it had to do with refrigerant in a refrigeration room, okay? And the IFC says you have to have gas detection in such a machinery room. Well, there's no definition in the IFC. I don't even recall it being defined in the IBC. So it made it sound like we were out of compliance because we had 70 refrigeration rooms. None of them had gas detection. And what you'll find later here is the machinery room has a very specific definition in terms of required construction if you're above a certain volume of refrigerant. And we didn't actually meet any of that, so I said, guys, this is not a big deal. Don't worry about this. But just keep in mind that there's specific definitions. So when you see machinery room, refrigeration room, for instance, go to Chapter 2 and get that definition before you have a knee-jerk reaction that you're out of compliance. And I'll show you the volumes when we get to the tables that show that. Equipment and appliance locations, 303. 303 is general requirements. So hazardous locations, appliances shall not be located in hazardous locations. You can't put fuel-fired appliances in sleeping rooms, storage closets, or surgical rooms, but keep in mind there are some very specific exemptions, and one is direct vent appliances. You'll be asked that. Guaranteed that'll come up on your test. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions. Look at the exemption here. That applies. That's a question they'll ask you. They seem to ask manufacturer instructions questions a lot in terms of, what do you follow? Do you follow this code, that code? If it says manufacturer's instructions, pick that one for your test answer. 18 inches comes a lot for your pilot light, for gas-fueled appliances. You got to keep it above the ground in repair garages specifically. So this is the table for piping support. You're going to need to know that table. You see how I tab that table? That way I could flip it open, because there's definitely questions that come up for piping. You'll have a similar piping table in the International Plumbing Code, so keep that in mind as well. It's basically the same though. So forgive the silence, just keep in mind, look at these highlights and update those in your code. I'm trying to think where this came into play. I think this was the refrigerant. Yeah, so they're going to ask you some questions on refrigeration intake for what's allowed, and that formula will kick in. Remember, in a crawl space, you have to do 0.02 CFM per square foot. That's a requirement. It's 1 square, let's see, what do they have for, it's 1 square foot per 1,500 square foot for foundation openings, but I think this is applied for your forced ventilation. That's what you need. How did that work? Oh, that was the equations. Oh, gotcha. I remember now. The question was, you had a 1,500 square foot crawl space. What ventilation did you have at 60% relative humidity? And it was 0.02 CFM times 1,500. Whatever that number was, that was the answer. Keep this in mind too. You'll be asked on bathroom and toilets. If it's continuous, it's 20 CFM, 50 CFM if you have a switch on it. Usually, I think most bathrooms, for residential construction have 100 CFM installed, but that's the minimums. So what this does, this ventilation rate section, This will give you the required ventilation rates. I mentioned before that formula over here. Okay, it applies over here. You have, so 50 CFM per 1,000 square feet plus you have RP here, CFM per person 5. And these values go into this formula over here. And then you have RA and times your area, AZ, A sub Z. So that's how you actually calculate it. Some of the questions actually asked, well, what's just the population air ventilation requirement? I did have one question like that didn't require the equation, but just keeping that in mind. So you have down here like toilet rooms public versus toilet rooms private. See that? There's a difference there. 50-70 versus 25-50. And actually that number 25 is a little different. I think normally it's 20, but I can't remember the difference. Anyway, just take a look at this. You'll figure it out. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. Beauty salons, take a look. I had to look at this reference to answer the question for beauty salon in terms of these numbers. R sub P, R sub Z and A, R sub A and A sub Z. Just keep in mind, always look at the footnotes, as simple as that. So I have a reference here for the International Fire Gas Code, section C101.1. I don't remember what that was, and I didn't plan for the test, but I'll show you my notes for the IFGC when I'm done with this. We'll go through that. There's something really crazy that pops out. I'll explain it. Otherwise, just take a look at my highlighted sections. What I do is I underline. So keep in mind, I underline the actual answer that you'll see. So that was the answer I saw on tests or had people tell me they saw. Another reference to IFGC for this section, section 503 of the IFGC. So the IMC and the IFGC kind of work hand in hand. So you actually need both to pass the test and do the job as a mechanical inspector. So just keep that in mind. Within the IMC, as far as fire protection goes, you compare NFP. It's not on the test. I'm trying to think if it was on Fire Plans Examiner. But the one thing that really stands out to me is there is an IMC requirement for smoke detection that is not in the NFP 72 standard for fire alarm systems. So just keep that in mind. If you ever do fire alarm stuff, look for the duct detection requirements. Let's see. Ducts conveying hazardous exhaust greater than 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Chimney. That's the definition of a chimney. So duct systems. Let's go through this quick. I want to make this reasonably quick. If you're just going to go through and highlight my highlights, this is, you don't have to, I'm not going to have to explain all this. So each of these highlights is on that practice exam. That's what it comes down to, or most of these highlights, not all of them, but most of them are. But if you highlight them all, you'll be able to do that practice exam for the IMC and be prepared to do the manufacturer's instructions. See that? It comes up again. It comes up a lot. Question will be, do you follow the IMC, IBC, IFC, or manufacturer's instructions? If you don't know, just default to manufacturer's instructions. It'll cover it, 80% of the time. Okay, approved access comes up occasionally. Let's see here. You have specific sign requirements for accessing the smoke and fire dampers. So I personally don't use the mechanical code a lot in my occupation. I did have to take this test to get the Master Code Professional. And I'm also licensed in mechanical engineering, so kind of interlaced in terms of, as far as fluid flow. Air is considered a fluid, so fluid flow would fall into the category of mechanical engineering. But the reality is when you take the mechanical test, unless you're doing specifically HVAC, not a lot of codes in it. There's different flavors of mechanical engineering. There's like 4 different PE exams you could take. But regardless, it is kind of goes hand in hand with that particular licensure. I'm also registered in fire protection engineering, which kind of goes with the heat transfer portions of this. Yeah, forgive me if I'm skipping stuff. The reality is, straight up, if you just go through that test, answer those questions with your highlights, it'll take care of any questions you might have. So take a look. This is what I was talking about. So this is the table that generates the need for a refrigeration machinery room. You don't need it unless you're above the volumes as a function of square footage. So I'm pretty sure I crafted some questions on those practice exams to test that. If you're below these thresholds for volumes of the various refrigerant types, then technically you're not in a refrigeration machinery room. Machinery rooms have very specific definitions, so you don't need to worry about all the other stuff that goes with that regarding fire protection and life safety, like gas monitoring. But you can see I had specific stuff here, the A1, etc. These are A1, A2, A3 type thing, or B, B2, B1. You see that there. That is the classification of hazard, and that's defined elsewhere in the code. Look at my highlights. I don't remember what table it was, but these are defined. So they'll ask you, like, what is the refrigerant classification, the hazard classification for R744, for instance? And it would be A1. It's just simple table lookup, not overly hard. This is a little different than other stuff. Normally your bad error is 5 feet or 3 feet in like the mechanical code for like the plumbing. If you do the plumbing test, it's 5 feet. This is talking specifically about refrigerant gases. So it's a little bit different, a little bit more hazardous. So that's why the 20 feet's different than like what you'd expect at 5 feet. And there's different numbers for like sewer vents, 3, 5, 10 feet, depending on where you're located to avoid the smells. But that's not a part of this test. I'll go through and explain the plumbing, commercial plumbing inspector certification exam in another video. See, hydronic piping. Always look in the back of the ICC standards and codes. They have a specific section for standards. See reference standards. So they're going to ask you, like in this case, they'll ask, well, what standard is used for steel pipe? What standard does steel pipe have to meet for hydronic pipe? And you're going to say, well, where the heck in the code was that? You could go to chapter 12 and look around. But the other thing you could do, so ASTM A53 was the answer. They'll give you a list of 4 standards, right? So you can just go and look up each of those 4 standards. So in this case, ASTM A53 specification for steel, piping. So the other ones won't even be close to it. That's another way you can answer that question. So yeah, joint compound on male threads only. Seems like I saw that both on IMC and the IPC test. So the commercial plumbing and commercial mechanical, it asked on both those tests, that question. That's why I have it heavily circled there. Remember what I said in another video for commercial building, I think also in fire inspector, I mentioned smoke index is always 450. It's kind of weird. Somebody explained they just defaulted to that. It works for everything, so I change it. You know, I mentioned before there's like I think one exemption I could find in the code that doesn't stick with 450. Otherwise, always pick 450. And the reason I say that is when they ask you like pipe insulation requirements, they'll say, well, what's the flame spread index limit and what's the smoke development index? So a quick cheat is to know that if it's like if they have 25 and 600 or 75 and 200, or they have like a 25 and 450, well the answer is 25 and 450. You can save yourself some grief if you don't know the flame spread index, but you do know the smoke development index. It's always 450. So that's a helpful hint to pass that test. Yeah, concrete masonry, penetrations always have to be sleeved. Flash point, yeah, I'm not going to read these to you. You can look them up. Okay. Heat pump ground loop. 1 inch from combustible materials. Okay, into the standards. I'm not going to go through these. I highlighted some of these to make my life easy. I think I did. Normally I do. But this is worthwhile. This is the index, okay? What I do in the index is when I can't remember where something is, when I finally find it, I'll actually put it in the index. So here, commercial cooking appliances, I included IFGC 304.11. So that way I could, go to the IFGC to answer something. Same thing here. I have an IFGC reference here for dispensing natural gas, dry cleaning. So just stuff I couldn't find. I included notes here to make my life a little easier. Anyway, I think that's about it for what you need there. Let me grab my IFGC really quick. Now, like I said, in this practice exam, I did not put anything in here for the test, but I do want to go through this just to show it to you. Let me see here. Let me make sure I got the right one. I'm pretty sure I do. Yeah, we'll go ahead and look through this. Thing is, I used a separate IFGC for the mechanical versus plumbing. I'm pretty sure this is the one I used for the mechanical, but let's just run through this. So once again, alternative materials. Once again, I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I'll talk a little bit more here than I did the other one, just because I don't have practice tests for this. Power. Power is a specific defined burner type. So both air and gas are applied, okay? So it's a little bit different, just a power burner. Keep that in mind. It has a specific definition if it comes up. Quick disconnect device. Where this comes into play is there's certain allowances for like a certain kind of stoves, things like that. I think the question was on a stove. And one of the options was quick disconnect device. So you'll actually see that. Okay, so prohibited locations. I mentioned before sleeping rooms, storage closets, etc. But once again, see how direct vent appliance comes up? So direct vent appliance, those things that have the input and output air on like one of those vertical furnaces, it can actually go just about anywhere as an exemption. So outdoor combustion air. Let's see. So 1 square inch per 4,000 BTU per hour. keep in mind, okay, here you got to, this is a trick. This will get you. So 2 permanent opening method, okay? The opening is 1 square inch per 4,000 BTU per opening. So they're going to ask you, like, what's the square footage you need in like one of these rooms using this method, and it's actually double what you're going to calculate, okay? So just keep that in mind on that. Otherwise, it's easy to miss that question. It's actually double what you're going to calculate. Just basically read that section carefully and understand. I'm trying to see where it says it. Vertical ducts, there it is, each opening. See each opening? Each opening shall have a minimum free area of 1 per 4,000 BTU per hour. So if you had like 100,000 BTU hour, to make the numbers easy, each area would have 25 square inches. And I think, top and bottom, so you need 50 square inches. But the reality is, I think you have to have more than that as a minimum. I can't remember what it is, but look and see. I don't think 50 square inches is big enough. I think you have to be bigger than that. But in any event, just keep in mind, in that example I just made up, that is double. So the question's going to be asked, what's the total area in the room? The answer in that kind of ad hoc question would be 50 square inches, not 25, okay? Kind of a hard thing to understand. Easy to miss, in other words. Okay, now get that. See this? Ducts shall not be screened where terminating in an attic. This goes contrary to some other stuff where screening is required. So for mechanical air intakes, things like that, you can't screen it. So just keep that in mind for combustion air. So once again, magic number 18 inches in repair garages for pilot lights. And that's because you don't want vapors with a density heavier than air to float to the bottom and ignite. Things like natural gas are going to go up and find a leak and dissipate, but the heavier than air stuff like propane and gasoline and heptane, stuff like that, it's actually going to go to the bottom. That's what that 18-inch rule is from. Let's see. Highlight and read what I'm doing. I'm not going to read it all. I think, Okay, scheduling. So this is Schedule 40, but determining the size. So what you're going to do is, I don't know if I'll go through it or not, but how do you find out what pipe size you need? So what you do is, there's your length, and there's your pipe diameter, and the capacity is here, okay? So if you've already calculated what capacity you need, and there's a really simple formula. There's 2 formulas that are going to be referenced in here. One is 1,000. I don't even want to quote it. When I get to, there it is. Okay, so A106.1, it's 1,000 BTU per cubic foot of gas, okay? So that's the magic number. So if you're calculating a bunch of stuff, just add up the BTU, divide by 1,000, and that'll get you your cubic feet per minute you need. Cubic feet per hour, excuse me. Cubic feet per hour that you need right there, okay? That's how you do it. Now 1,000 BTU per cubic foot, there's another formula that allows you to size that lower, but this is a conservative number to use, and typically ICC will expect you to use 1,000 BTU per cubic feet. And just look at A106.1 in the annex for more clear definitions on that. Or the appendix. Appendix A. All right, let's see if I got anything more here. Some just more sizing stuff. Okay. Piping materials. So copper tubing, type K, you'll ask about K. Let's see. So never use cast iron pipe. Steel pipe has to meet the ASME standard. Use type K. I can't remember where type K specifically came up in the question. I just can't remember the question. But the answer was type K, not type L. Maybe it was just a list of stuff they gave, and type K was in one of the multiple choices, and type L wasn't included. You can never use aluminum underground, period. You know, if it's ever asked, aluminum's never allowed underground. It deteriorates too fast, or outdoor locations. Trying to think what the question was. How many threads on a 1-inch iron pipe? Anyway, it's 10. If that comes up, you know where it is. So I can't remember what the question was. It was like, which of these is not allowed for connecting Schedule 40 pipe? Threaded was allowed, brazed was allowed, welded was allowed. Maybe it was a compression. I think compression fitting was not allowed. That was the answer, compression fitting. I didn't write it down. I took this quite a while ago, but I think that was, let's see. Plastic pipe and joints. So compression type mechanical joints for plastic pipes are allowed, but there's some parameters there you got to follow. Let's see. So yeah, you can't go in underground for your foundation fitting. So that was an answer. So underground piping to protect it, factory applied electrically insulated coating was the answer. Minimum burial depth is 12 inches. Okay, piping installed underground beneath buildings is prohibited except where the piping is encased. It seems like a couple of questions came up on that. I'm trying to think what they were. So if you had like a crawl space, can you have underground piping? Well, the answer is no, unless it's encased in like something else. So a tracer for your piping is required. Yeah, and you can never use plastic pipe. Plastic pipe shall be installed outdoors, underground only. So, yeah. Anyway, let's see. Let's keep on going here. Yeah, and oxygen can never be used for any kind of test that you do, period. You just can't use it. Slope, 1/4 inch and 15 feet for your gas lines. Okay, so I'm trying to think. I had a lot of questions on shut-off. So located within the same room, shut-off valve is within 6 feet of the appliance. And access. I want to be clear, access, what does accessible mean? It doesn't have to be ready access for shut-off valves. I'm trying to think, like, if there's some requirement. In other words, ready access means you can walk up to and turn it. Accessible simply, or access, not ready access, but access means you could use a screwdriver to open up a plate or something like that to get to it or pull something out. So they might confuse and say it has to be readily accessible, and it doesn't. Not for a valve. Okay, appliance and manufactured connections. Let's see, labeled quick disconnect. So this all came from one question. I don't remember what it was. Anyway, your metallic tubing, your gas, flexible lines can't exceed 6 feet. That's there. Probably seen that with your water heaters and stuff. Yeah. So there's interval of support for your gas lines, steel pipe, distance between your spacing based on size, spacing of supports. Yeah, know this. You're going to have a couple of questions for support. So the other one we looked at in mechanical code, we looked at that PVC or CPVC table for supports. That'd be like your condensate lines, things like that. This is gas lines, delivery lines. It's a little bit different. But you see how I tabbed that table? I tabbed this table on the side so I could get right to it during a test. I had a few questions on this in the test. So, all right, chimneys and vents. Let's check this out. Important table to know. A gas vent terminate in accordance with one of the following. So 12 inches or less in size and located not less than 8 feet from a vertical wall shall terminate above the roof in accordance with this figure. Okay? And then it gives you different roof slopes for your height, H. So H is your height that you're going for there. So from here to here is what they mean, okay? So, okay, let's see what else there is here. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to kill myself there. Draft hood shall be relief open. Yeah, just highlight it and read it. Water heaters. So it gives you the listings. Once again, take a look. Shall be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Right there. It's the same question they ask over and over again. Let's see here. And then over here, once again, the standards. If you don't remember the standards, go to the standards section here, reference standards chapter. That'll help you look stuff up. Okay, so Appendix A. So this will actually tell you how to size it. Remember what I said about 1,000 BTU per cubic foot? Because they're referencing it here, ICC is going to expect you to use 1,000 BTU per cubic foot in calculating it. So you see how it's 35,000 BTUs, the rating for your heater, a itty-bitty heater, 35 cubic feet per hour, 35 cubic feet per hour, okay? So that's what you need for your gas delivery. And how you do a circuit, see this? What you'd have is all, like you have an outlet, you have a closed dryer, you have a furnace, you have a water heater, okay? So you'd do 75,000 divided by 1,000. There's 75 cubic feet per hour. 35,000 divided by 1,000. 100,000 divided by 1,000, etc. So you have 75, 35, 100, and 35. Add those together, and that tells you how much gas is coming through this line. And then that table I showed you way back earlier, I can't even remember what chapter that was. I have it tabbed, don't I? Yeah, right here. Don't I have this tabbed? Yeah, so there you go. So that's how you find out. You have your CFH here, okay? And you know how long it is, and then you can find out what diameter of pipe you need for Schedule 40, okay? So that's how you do that. I think that's it, folks. So that wraps up the International Mechanical Code review and the International Fire Fuel Gas Code for the Commercial Mechanical Inspector, Test M2. I'll do another one on the plumbing test at some point, but I'm just trying to think if there's any gotchas. There is some overlap between the mechanical and plumbing inspector tests. They use the same reference as far as the IFGC. What are the big takeaways? The crawl space one, I remember that coming up a lot. Having underground piping, aluminum piping, problematic. you're calculating your vent. There's different vent types. I didn't talk about that. I think I do in the online test. But there's different vent types, whether you're burning fuel oil or gas, or you have like a chimney burning wood fuel. So there's different classifications of vents there. Anyway, yeah, just go through that online test. Should be pretty straightforward. Thanks for watching this long video. If you have any ways for me to improve, let me know. I'm happy to do something. I will tell you this, though. My son is he's developing a series of tests, really cheap. I mean, using artificial intelligence to learn the layout of the code. Best bang for the buck. It'll be at livesayconsulting.com when we put that together. But it'll be like $10 per book for like everything. Like if you're doing building code, mechanical code, whatever, it'll be $10 per ICC standard or code. So it'll be really cheap, and there'll be like, I don't know, 1,000 questions you could go through. And a lot of those questions are going to be 4.0 with what you're going to see on the test. Some won't be, but what it will do is help you learn the code. So keep waiting for that if you need additional help. The test I gave you here is free. The one my son's developing is 4.0. It'll look really good. Anyway, appreciate your time watching this. Good luck to you. Let me know in the comments if you have any concerns or commentary for how I can improve. You have a good one. Catch you later.